Good afternoon. Today I'm going to be reviewing my July 2025 State of the Collection. I currently have a two-piece collection and I keep my two pieces in this Mirage Luxury travel roll. On the left we have my Rolex Submariner date 126610LV Starbucks. On the right we have my Rolex Submariner date 16610. So what's changed since my previous State of the Collection review? Well, I sold my San Martin SN0111GA and I sold my modified Invicta Pro Diver 9094OB. So why did I add a Starbucks to my collection? Well, I reviewed this piece 4 years ago on my channel and I've always fancied one since. Now, to clarify, this is a Mark 1 piece from 2021. Why did I purchase a Mark 1 from 2021 versus the Mark 2, which is currently in production in 2025? I purchased this piece from Chrono24 for €13,380 and I specifically wanted a Mark 1 for two reasons. I prefer the green tone of the Mark 1 bezel. So the Mark 1 had a limited production run between September 2020 and May 2023 respectively, and it has a darker green bezel. Then after May 2023, Rolex succeeded it with the Mark II, which has a lighter green bezel. Of the two, I prefer the Mark I. That's one reason. The second reason is it's thought that the limited production run only produced between 40,000 and 50,000 pieces. It's not known, only Rolex SA Geneva know the specific number, but it is thought to be between 40 and 50,000. So therefore, when this Starbucks is discontinued, probably after a 10-year production run, prices of the Mark I will appreciate rapidly because they will become sought after by purist Rolex collectors because of the relatively short production run between September 2020 and May 2023, because there are only 40 to 50,000 in circulation worldwide. The Mark II will not be as desirable because, of course, longer production run from 2023, probably for the remainder of the 10 years. Typically, Rolex use 10-year production cycles or production runs for Submariner date models. So I just simply prefer the Mark I green. Back in 2018, I owned a Rolex Hulk and I liked the green Cerachrome bezel and the green sunburst dial. However, there's one thing I disliked about my Hulk, and it's the reason why I sold it. It uses the maxi case, and the maxi case has thick square lugs, and I think that it spoils the look of it. I prefer the 16610 iconic case shape, and that's the reason why I like my 16610 so much. Rolex really attained perfection with the 16610 classic Submariner and Submariner date case. This Starbucks has a slimmer lug profile to the Hulk that I owned in 2018, so it doesn't have the maxi case. Rolex slimmed down the lugs. I think they realised their mistake. This does look more like the taper of the lugs on a 16610, but it's not perfect because it doesn't have the 20 to 16 perfection personified taper that the 16610 does have. I think that this would look more aesthetically pleasing if it had the same 20 to 16 perfection personified taper as my 16610, because you can see there's more meat on the bracelet. Now visually, Rolex have tried to slim down the lugs from the maxi case to make them thinner and more aesthetically pleasing, and they also flared the bracelet more with a wider lug width, and of course the wider bracelet is meant to balance the thinner lugs and make it more visually aesthetically pleasing, rather than the maxi case used in the Hulk, for example, which had thick lugs and a 20 to 16 taper. So the bracelet looked undersized on the maxi case head of the piece. So with regards to the two pieces, I like them both. And in the last 5 years, since I started my WR4K channel, I have reviewed over 500 watches. And of all the watches I've reviewed, these are my favourites of them all. Collectors sometimes talk about a grail piece or a one and done piece. For me, that is the 16610. This piece I will never sell. I absolutely love the 16610. I regard the 16610 classic Submariner and Submariner date case as perfection. Rolex really attained perfection. They've never produced a better shape of case. This Starbucks case is better than the maxi case, but it's still not as good as the 16610 case. Now, if you look at the crown guard shape, you can see this is better. They made the crown guards pointed on the 16610, which really does give the case a vintage aesthetic. And I prefer the pointed crown guards, and of course the taper is perfection personified on the 16610 case. With these Starbucks, you can see it has a more squared profile to the crown guards, more like a Hulk, for example, or the 116610 LN, which of course used the maxi case. The lugs are tapered, but not as much as the 16610, and I think the pointed crown guards of the 16610, if they'd used it on this case, it would have looked more aesthetically pleasing, and the same taper on the 16610 lugs, if they'd used it on this case, it would have looked better with a 20-16. But they are both good looking. Now, subjectively, I prefer the aluminium bezel insert, and prior to purchasing this Starbucks, I actually considered purchasing a Kermit because I really like the aluminium bezel insert used on the Kermit, specifically the later versions, for example from 2007, because they have a dark aluminium green bezel insert. I dislike the earlier 2004 versions of the Kermit because they have a more lime green tone to the aluminium bezel insert, and of course with time that fades and patinas. I prefer the darker green used on the later versions from 2007, for example. But of course the benefit of the Cerachrome used on the Starbucks versus the aluminium bezel inserts used on the Kermit is it's harder and more scratch resistant. And I did like the green Cerachrome bezel used on my Hulk, but I actually prefer the black glossy enamel dial finish to the Starbucks versus the green Sunburst dial used on the Hulk I previously owned. Now, between the two pieces, there's something I dislike about the Starbucks and I prefer about the 16610, which may come as a surprise to you. It's the movement. So, this 16610 uses the caliber 3135, which has a 48-hour power reserve. The Starbucks uses its successor, the caliber 3235, which has a 70-hour power reserve. So, 48-hour power reserve versus 70 hours. Now, of course, you would expect me to prefer the successor, the 3235 with 70 hours, versus the predecessor, 3135 with 48. But I don't. And that may come as a surprise to you, and I'll show you why. It's very simple. The 3135 is a masterpiece. It's technically excellent. It's one of the best Rolex calibers ever made. Very long production run, used in a plethora of Rolex pieces, including the Submariner date. The reliability is outstanding, the accuracy is outstanding, but above all else, there's something I like about it, which is fundamental. When you're in the time setting position, when you rotate the crown clockwise, the hands rotate clockwise. When you rotate the crown anti-clockwise, the hands rotate anti-clockwise. This is the convention. It's intuitive, and I like it. Now, with the caliber 3235, its successor, it doesn't do that, and I dislike that. So, to show you, when you're in the time setting position, when you rotate the crown clockwise, the hands move anti-clockwise. The gearing reverses the direction of the hands. When you rotate the crown anti-clockwise, the hands move clockwise. It feels like it's backwards. It's reversed due to the gearing. And of course the chronology movement is technically excellent. It uses ceramic ball bearings versus steel ball bearings, and of course it's more efficient and it has a higher power reserve as a result, 48 hours versus 70. Although it's technically a better movement, the problem is it reverses the hands, as you can see. When you rotate the crown clockwise, it makes the hands go anti-clockwise. So it's not intuitive, and it's a fundamental thing, but I dislike it. Of all the watches I've owned, rotating the crown clockwise always rotates the hands clockwise, which is the industry standard, it's convention. So that's something I dislike about Rolex chronology movements, such as the caliber 3235. Now, they are technically excellent. The build quality, quality control, materials and finishing are stellar. And of course, reliability is stellar, accuracy is stellar. However, it's just a fundamental thing I dislike about chronology movements. They reverse the gearing, or the direction of the hands is reversed. But in terms of the two pieces, they wear very similar on the wrist because, of course, the Starbucks has a slimmed down case profile versus the Maxi case used in the Hulk and the 116610 LN, which I previously reviewed and also owned. So I'll give you wrist shots of both pieces. Now, it came as a pleasant surprise that I didn't need to resize the bracelet. This is how it comes from the factory. And again, this is something I usually dislike because it has an odd number of links. From the factory, from Rolex SA Geneva, the Oyster bracelet fitted to the Starbucks comes with an odd number of links. 5 full links on the 6 o'clock side and 6 full links on the 12 o'clock side respectively. Now the problem is that makes the clasp sit off centre. The glide lock clasp never sits centrally on the wrist because it has 5 on one side, 6 on the other. Now of course you can adjust the glide lock for on the fly adjustment and move the length of the bracelet to get it sized correctly, but 5 on one side, 6 on the other means it never sits centrally. Now this is the reason with my 16610, just bear with me, I'll screw the crown back down because I don't want dust particles to contaminate the movement lubricant. So I actually ordered 2 oyster links from Rolex SA Geneva, and then I visited a Rolex authorised dealer to have them fitted, because it used to be the case that Rolex authorised dealers would send out the links to the collector and you could fit them yourself. But then Rolex changed their policy and they no longer allow Rolex authorised dealers to post oyster links to the collector. You have to visit the authorised dealer, present the piece, and what they do is they verify the piece is correct. They check that it's not incorrect or counterfeit, because they check the serial number and of course they remove the case back to examine the calibre. The reason why they don't post out the links anymore is because they don't want links to be sold on eBay and of course used in counterfeit pieces or incorrect pieces. So you can see this one has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 full links. From the factory, from Rolex SA Geneva, only comes with 5 links on the 6 o'clock side, but I added an additional link on the 6 o'clock side, and also added an additional link on the 12 o'clock side, but I've since removed it because I found it slightly too loose. So we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 1 inside the clasp. So we now have 6 and 6. And as you can see, it balances it better because the flip lock clasp now sits centrally beneath the head of the piece, and of course when it's on wrist it's more centralised. When it comes from the factory, it had an odd number, which is always the case. It had 5 full links on one side and 6 on the other. And of course the clasp never sat centrally and I was never satisfied with the fit. So I added 2 additional links, one on the 6, one on the 12 side, and I've since removed one from the 6, one from the 12 side. So I've now got 6 and 6, and this now sits how I like it. The fit is correct. Now this one is actually okay as it is because we've got 5 on one side and 6 on the other, but with a glide lock adjustment I can get it correct, and the clasp does sit slightly too far to the 6 o'clock side, but it's okay, it's good enough. So feel good factor is 10 out of 10, comfort level is 10 out of 10, very aesthetically pleasing piece. I like the contrast between the green Cerachrome bezel and the glossy enamel black dial. Prefer it to the green Cerachrome bezel and green sunburst dial on my Hulk from 2018, and I think the taper would just enhance it if it were the Perfection Personified 20-16 taper used on my 16610. The other thing is the glide lock clasp really is too bulky for this bracelet. Had they used a 20-16 taper, they could have slimmed down the glide lock clasp, because as it stands, the bracelet is wider of course, the clasp is therefore wider. This would look better if it were slimmer and lower profile. They could simply scale down the proportions of the glide lock. It looks okay on my large 8-inch wrist because it's got the right curvature, and of course the width of it and the bulk of it isn't as noticeable. But on a smaller wrist of 6 to 7 inches, the glide lock clasp will be too large. That's the negative. The glide lock clasp used on the predecessor, the 116610LN, and of course the 116610LV, which was the Hulk, that had a thinner, lower profile glide lock. The proportions of the previous glide lock were better. This one is more wide and therefore it's more bulky. But feel good factor is excellent, comfort level is excellent, and when I reviewed it 4 years ago and I put it on wrist, I immediately liked it and I really fancied it. But at the time I was considering purchasing a Kermit because I really like the green aluminium bezel insert, and I couldn't make my mind up between a Starbucks and a Kermit, and I liked both and I just couldn't decide. So I then later actually chose a different watch. I chose the 16610 because the black aluminium bezel inserts, I like the silver minute ticks, the silver Arabic numerals and the silver hour markers on it. I just love the reflective property of aluminium. I actually prefer aluminium bezel inserts to Cerachrome, although they're not as hard and scratch resistant. I just like the look of silver and black versus platinum. So to clarify, Cerachrome is made by sintering ceramic at the very high melting point of 3000 degrees Celsius, and then what they do is Rolex heat up the ceramic to 3000 degrees Celsius and they sinter platinum particles into the engravings in the Cerachrome. So you have the minute ticks, the hour markers, the Arabic numerals, and the background triangle to the limb pip. They're all platinum inlay in the ceramic, and that's how they do it. And of course it's very hard and scratch resistant, platinum inlaid into Cerachrome. But the problem with platinum is it's very dull. It's a dull silver. It's not a shiny silver like 904L oyster steel or alternatively 316L grade stainless steel. If you look at the tone of the platinum, it doesn't look white like white's paint, which is often used in homage watches. For example, I've reviewed a plethora of homages to the Starbucks. The Steinhardt Ocean 139 Starbucks homage, the steel dive SD 1953, the Pagani design PD1661. I've also done a Sujes Seaman. So I've reviewed a plethora of homages to the Starbucks, but they all either have, in the case of the steel dive SD 1953, it uses BGW9, a fully loomed ceramic bezel insert, but the others just use white paint. White paint actually looks better, which is ironic because platinum is of course more expensive and harder and more scratch resistant. It's a precious metal. You would expect platinum to look better, but the truth is white paint actually looks more legible because this platinum has a dull grey finish to it. It doesn't look silver and reflective as per the aluminium bezel insert. Now if you look at the silver minute ticks and the Arabic numerals on this aluminium bezel insert, they're more shiny, the legibility is better, but I think that the silver minute ticks and the silver Arabic numerals on an aluminium bezel insert are more aesthetically pleasing. Rolex tried to replicate that metallic look by using platinum rather than just using white paint. I actually think they've made a mistake, and what they could have done was use a ceramic bezel insert as per the Tudor Pelagos, because that is fully loomed with BGW9. And of course then you'd have the benefit of Cerachrome, which is ceramic, it's hard and scratch resistant, but you'd also have the benefit of a fully loomed bezel, as per the Pelagos, which glows in the dark. Platinum doesn't glow in the dark, of course, and therefore it really doesn't look good in daylight because it's a dull grey look rather than silver metallic finish. And also one doesn't get the benefit of BGW9 as per a Pelagos bezel. So I actually prefer the Pelagos bezel in blue versus the green Starbucks bezel with platinum. And of course you would think platinum would be better, but BGW9 actually is better. So there is something else I prefer about the 16610. If you look at the finishing, now this may come as a surprise to you, but there is a notable difference in the finishing, and often collectors are critical of homages to the 16610 because of it, which is ironic because the 16610 really was the last of Rolex tool watches. So to clarify, this one was new old stock. It was the very last 2010, December 2010, 16610 piece before they were discontinued and succeeded in 2011 by the successor, the 116610LN, which I previously owned and reviewed on my channel. The finishing changed. If you look at the tops of the lugs, it actually has coarse brush satin finishing, which is radial. So rather than being, lateral, rather than being circular or radial. So it's lateral. It's got a grained finish to it, but the grained finish to the oyster steel is actually coarse. It's not brush satin finish to the same fine grained finish as the oyster bracelet, which has a very fine finish to it, has beautiful luster to the fine grained finish to the longitudinal brush satin finishing. On the tops of the lugs, it has lateral brush satin finishing, but it's actually more coarse. And this isn't a production defect. This piece was new old stock from 2010. This is exactly how it looked when it came from the factory in 2010. It has this coarse lateral brush satin finishing, which is slightly rougher looking than the bracelet, but actually gives the piece a tool watch aesthetic. It's not a dress piece, it's not a daily wear piece. This was a dive watch, it was a tool watch. And of course 2010 was the last of it. Then they discontinued it. It was the last time they used an aluminium bezel insert. In 2011 they used the maxi case and then they upgraded to a Cerachrome bezel. But with this one, the Starbucks, you can see it has the same finer brush satin finishing to the tops of the lugs as per its predecessor, the 116610LV, which was the Hulk. And it has that fine finish to the oyster steel, the 904L oyster steel, same brush satin finishing as the bracelet. Now subjectively one could say, well, this is better finishing, the fine grained satin finishing to the tops of the lugs is better, but I prefer the more tool watch look, which is more like vintage Rolex pieces, for example, like the 5513, which is one of my personal favourites. If you look at the top of the lugs, it has that coarser lateral brush satin finishing. It looks rougher, but it gives the 16610 a more tool watch aesthetic. I really think the 16610 represents the last of Rolex making tool watches. The pre-ceramic era, when they used aluminium bezel inserts, that was when the Rolex Submariner dates was easily available from Rolex authorised dealers, and also it was affordable. Now I say affordable, they were always an expensive piece, but I can remember when I purchased my first Rolex Submariner 14060M when I was 21 for £2,500 with a box and papers. It was pre-owned. Back then, the 14060M, which was the Submariner, no date version, and the 16610, the date version, were freely available from Rolex authorised dealers. And the price was circa €2,500 for a 14060M Submariner and €3,000 for a 16610 Submariner dates respectively. The point was, you could walk into a Rolex authorised dealer in any city in the United Kingdom and you could purchase a 14060M or a 16610 straight out of the window. And there was no waiting list nonsense, and anyone could purchase it without any prior purchase history or any relationship with the Rolex authorised dealer. $2,500 for a Submariner, $3,000 for a 16610. Now, I purchased this 2010 from December, new old stock. It was fully coated with protective films. It had been in storage in a safe or a vault from 2010 up until I purchased it, so it was new old stock. It was brand new condition, and I paid $14,500 for this because it was new old stock. It was brand new, unworn, with all the protective films, and I wanted a brand new, perfect 10 out of 10 new old stock December 2010, one of the very last 16610s ever made. So I was willing to pay a premium to purchase it, but they've appreciated massively, exponentially with time. So back in 2005, for example, they were €3,000, and then in 2010, when they finished, the prices, when they ceased production, the prices appreciated, and of course I purchased this for $14,500, which is significantly more than its original €3,000 price point. Same will be the case with this Starbucks Mark 1, because only 40 to 50,000 are thought to be in circulation. Had the short production run, the Mark 1 was only produced for 3 years versus the Mark II, which is still in production and will continue probably for a 10-year production cycle. So the Mark 1 is going to be more collectible. This 2010, of course, is collectible because it's a December 2010. It's one of the very last made. Now, there is a notable difference in this one. Early versions of the 16610 had hollow folded end links, rather like an Invicta Pro Diver, which is an homage to it. This one has solid end links, and it has solid links in the bracelet rather than hollow links, but in all cases the 16610 had this abhorrent pressed clasp, but that was the standard they were using even up until 2010 when it was discontinued. There's one notable difference between this one and earlier versions, and it's not, as you'd expect, the lume. Early versions of the 16610 used tritium. Tritium was then succeeded by luminova, and then finally it was succeeded by superluminova. So as this is a 2010, one of the very last, this has superluminova, so it's the very best of the 16610. But there's another notable enhancement. Early versions of the 16610 did not have AR coating on the underside of the Cyclops magnifier, which gives 2.5 times magnification. This one does have AR coating, so it's unusual, but for some reason Rolex did not use AR coating on the 16610 throughout its production life. When the 16610 LN was introduced in 2011 as its successor, Rolex added AR coating on the underside of the sapphire crystal. So you can see Cyclops magnifier has AR coating, but the crystal itself does not have AR coating. Now, if I tilt both pieces at an oblique angle, you can see the Starbucks has AR coating both on the underside of the Cyclops magnifier. There you can see the difference. On the right, you can see there clearly is no AR coating on the underside of the sapphire crystal on my 16610, but on the underside of the sapphire crystal on my Starbucks there is AR coating both on the Cyclops magnifier and the sapphire crystal. On the 16610 you can see that there is AR coating on the underside of the Cyclops magnifier, but they didn't put it on the underside of the sapphire crystal. So that's the main enhancement of the 126610 series, including this Starbucks. The LV in the reference denotes lunettes vertes, which in Swiss French means green bezel, and the same LV reference was used in the Kermit and also on the Hulk. So LV means lunette verte. But you can see the difference. The Starbucks does have better clarity. The 16610 doesn't, although it does have it on the underside of the Cyclops magnifier. So I'll give you a wrist shot of the 16610. In terms of comfort level, they both feel exactly the same. I actually prefer the clasp in terms of comfort level and feel good factor, because this is lighter, but the actual proportions of this clasp are better. But of course the bracelet is perfection personified, so therefore the clasp can be thinner. 20 to 16 visually looks better, taper of the lugs looks better. So in terms of feel-good factor and comfort level, they're equal, but this visually looks better simply due to the taper on the lugs, taper on the bracelet. Proportions of the clasp are better. So I prefer the fit of the 16610, and I think Rolex simply could have updated the 16610 when they succeeded it with the 16610 LN. They should have simply just added a Cerachrome bezel to it and a glide lock clasp. That was enough. And they could have succeeded the movement with a 3235, but fitted it inside the 16610 case. So one would have had the benefit of Cerachrome bezel, AR coating on the underside of the sapphire crystal, retain the 20-16 taper, but add a glide lock. That to me would have been the perfect Rolex Submariner date, the ultimate. The Starbucks isn't the ultimate because, yes, it has a technically excellent movement, but they've reversed the gearing and the chronology movements reverse the hand direction. And of course, they've changed the taper, 20-16. They've slimmed down the lugs. It does look better than the Maxi case, but it's not perfection. There's room for improvement. Now, the glide lock clasp is a benefit, of course, because one does have this on-the-fly adjustment, and it does feel very smooth. Now, this is something that homages to the Starbucks do not get as good as Rolex. The glide lock is the very best because on the two sliders there are Teflon pads, and the Teflon of course is low friction, and what that does is it reduces the friction of the 904L oyster steel rubbing against the 904L oyster steel. So for example, the two sliders would have friction because it would be metal to metal, but what Rolex do is they add two Teflon pads, and of course then it gets this nice smooth feeling. It articulates freely, it slides up and down freely without the friction of metal to metal contact one would get with 904L rubbing against 904L. Teflon is smooth and of course lower friction. So the glide lock clasp is better, and often on homage watches they simply have 316L grade stainless steel sliders rubbing against the body internally, which is 316L grade stainless steel. Metal to metal will never be as smooth as Teflon to metal, so of course that's the benefit, but this is not the perfect clasp, and it's something that Tudor actually do better with regards to their T-fit clasp. For example, they use ceramic ball bearings. This uses 904L oyster steel ball bearings. So to clarify, if you look at the clasp, the mechanism, on the left and the right hand flank you can see there's a ball bearing. So when the clasp snaps shut, the flip lock closes onto the spring loaded ball bearings with a nice positive click. And it's crisp. It's very good. But however, it's not as good as on a Tudor Black Bay clasp or a Black Bay 58s, because Tudor use ceramic ball bearings. Now, why is it beneficial? Well, ceramic is harder and more scratch resistant than stainless steel, including 904L oyster steel and 316L grade stainless steel. And you see, with Tudor clasp, they have these ceramic ball bearings. So in time, the ceramic ball bearings are not going to wear down with daily wear, with wear and tear, as per stainless steel. 904L oyster steel ball bearings are going to wear. And what's going to happen in time with this is the ball bearings are going to wear, and therefore the clasp is there going to become looser. It's not going to snap shut with this nice positive click. The ball bearings, which are spring loaded, engage in dimples on the inside of the flip lock, but with a Tudor clasp such as the T-fit clasp, the ceramic ball bearings are never going to wear down like steel. And even after 10 years or 15 years or 20 years of daily use, clicking over the flip lock on a Tudor Black Bay or Black Bay 54 clasp is always going to have that crisp feeling because the ball bearings are ceramic engaging in the dimples. So this is something that surprised me about Tudor. Rolex should be using the very best available, the best possible materials, because they're doing it with a bezel. The bezel is made from Cerachrome, it's not made from aluminium, which is harder and more scratch resistant. Cerachrome is better. But why aren't they doing it with the ball bearings? Because this is steel. They're not using ceramic. Now, they are capable of using ceramic because, for example, in the chronology movement, the caliber 32-35, it uses ceramic ball bearings versus steel in the ball bearing race. So disappointing. And these are the things that one could be magnanimous about, these kind of shortcomings, if this were a Tudor Pelagos, a Tudor Black Bay, or a Black Bay 54. But this is a Starbucks. This is meant to be the very best of the Rolex Submariner dates. This is the current version. It's a Mark 1, but it's the same as the 2025 version. So it's not the very best of Rolex as far as I'm concerned, because they could use ceramic ball bearings in the clasp as per the Pelagos and the Black Bay and the Black Bay 54. And it's ironic really, because the Pelagos and the Black Bay are less expensive than the Starbucks, but they actually have better ball bearings in the clasp. That's the truth of it. The T-Fit clasp is every bit as good as the Glide Lock clasp in terms of build quality, quality control, materials and finishing, but one could argue that the 9040 Oyster Steel bracelet, the Oyster bracelet, looks better without rivets as per the Black Bay and the Black Bay 58, but this is subjective. In terms of build quality, Rolex bracelets and Tudor bracelets are very similar. Again, this isn't the perfect piece, and of course Rolex fanboys are unable to look objectively or critically at their watch. They will spend a lot of money. For example, they'll pay €13,380 for a Starbucks from Chrono24, as I did. And because they're invested in it, because they've spent so much money on it and they're a Rolex fanboy, they have bias and they're not able to objectively weigh up their piece like a watch reviewer. But my reviews are fair and rather than unfair, and they're unbiased. And when I give criticism to a brand, it's fair criticism. So this is not perfect, and I say this as a Rolex fanboy because it doesn't have female pooted end links. And I apply the same criticism to the 16610. I always thought the 16610 would have better comfort level and feel good factor, better fit, had they used female pooted end links as per the Black Bay 58. Because the Tudor Black Bay 58 has excellent female pooted end links. They articulate very well. They allow the end link in the Oyster style bracelet to articulate beneath the lugs. And Rolex have not improved upon this, because you can see the centre section of the end link has this large rectangular slab of 9040 Oyster steel. So that effectively makes the lug-to-lug measurement very long, because we get this gap beneath the tips of the lugs and the end link in the Oyster bracelet. If they use female pivoted end links as per the Black Bay or the Black Bay 58, that would allow the end link in the Oyster bracelet to articulate, and the end link would then pull closer to the wrist. We wouldn't get this abhorrent gap beneath the tips of the lugs and of course underneath the end link in the bracelet, because there's always that gap there regardless whether you have a 6 to 7 inch wrist or a 7 to 8 inch wrist. It would look better with a line across this rectangular slab in the centre, more aesthetically pleasing, but more importantly better fit. The truth is, and I've owned a Black Bay and a Black Bay 58, and I speak from personal experience, they give a better fit, because the female pooted end links on the Black Bay and the Black Bay 58 articulate better. That's the truth of it. But of course, a Rolex fanboy will subjectively never be able to admit that, because they love the Starbucks, they're a Rolex fanboy. They can't objectively say, well, I dislike the male end links on my Starbucks. The truth is my Black Bay 58 fitted better, but that is the truth. And that's really the difference between a paid shill that gives fake positive reviews on their YouTube watch review channel and somebody like myself who gives honest, credible and unbiased reviews. And even though I'm invested in this piece, I personally paid €13,380 for it, I'm still able to look at it objectively and say, well, it doesn't have female pooted end links, it would look better if it did. The taper is not 20 to 16, it's not perfection personified. The glide lock clasp is too bulky, it does not have ceramic ball bearings as per a Pelagos, Black Bay or Black Bay 58 T-Fit clasp, which is better because of the ceramic ball bearings versus steel. These are the kind of things that a Rolex fanboy will not admit and a paid shill will not admit. So that's the difference. Even though I've purchased it with my own money, I do love the piece, but subjectively I'm able to be critical of it. So it's not the perfect Rolex piece. The truth is, had Rolex updated the 16610 with a Cerachrome bezel, glide lock clasp and also AR coating, it would have been the ultimate Submariner date, and they could have updated the caliber 3135 to 3235. It would be the perfect Submariner date. The Starbucks is close to it. It's better, technically. The 3235 is better. 70 hours is better than 48. Taper is not better. Female pooted end links are absent. Glide lock clasp is too bulky, and it doesn't have ceramic ball bearings. And the squared profile to the crown guards does not look better than the pointed crown guards on the 16610. So there are some positives to the 126610 case and of course the glide lock clasp and the movement, the 3235, but the truth is the 16610 still does look like a better piece. If I had to choose one piece, if I had to choose a one and done watch or a grail piece, it still remains the 16610. I do love the look of the Starbucks. I do like the glide lock clasp. It's nice to have on the fly adjustment, and of course the AR coating is better. 70 hours, of course, is beneficial versus 48. But if I had to choose one piece, I would choose the 16610. I just think it's a better looking piece. The feel good factor and the comfort level is superior due to the taper of the lugs and of course the perfection personified taper of the bracelet. So that may come as a surprise to you, because one would expect a Rolex fanboy to say, well, the Starbucks is a better piece than the 16610. Technically it is. 70 hours is better than 48, Cerachrome is harder than aluminium bezel insert, glide lock is better than the flip lock clasp, and of course the 3235 is more efficient, it's technically better. There is a notable difference in service interval. Now, it's changed. Originally the 3135 had a 5-year service interval, but then what happened was, when Rolex developed the caliber 3235, its successor, they also developed a high-performance lubricant for the newer movement, the 3235. And the benefit of that high-performance lubricant is it extended the service interval. The 3135 needs to be serviced every 5 years, which currently costs circa €700, including polishing the piece. The service interval for the 3235 is longer, it's 10 years, but they're now using, when they service the 3135s, they're using the same high performance lubricant in the 3135 as the 3235. So this now extends the service interval of the 3135 to 10 years. So they now both have the same 10-year interval, simply due to the better quality lubricant. So to clarify, the reason why mechanical movements, both automatics and manual wind movements, need to be serviced is because every time you open the crown, whether it's a push-pull crown or a screw-down crown, you break the hermetic seal, regardless of whether it's 100 metres, 200 metres or 300 metres as per a trip-lock crown. When you break the hermetic seal, when you unscrew the crown to manually wind the movements, set the date or set the time, you break the hermetic seal, and therefore you allow air particles to enter the case, which is hermetically sealed, and the air contains dust particles which contaminate the lubricant inside the movement. And the problem with the dust particles is they contaminate the lubricant and therefore increase friction, which exacerbates the wear in the moving parts, such as the gears, for example. Because when you mix dust particles into lubricant, you get dirty oil. It's rather like car engine oil having carbon in it as a contaminant. So the carbon increases friction and therefore exacerbates engine wear. When the oil in an engine, regardless of whether it's petrol or diesel powered, when the oil becomes contaminated with carbon, it increases the friction and therefore increases the heat between the moving parts, the metal parts, and therefore increases the wear. Now, of course, you can counteract that with polymer as per synthetic engine oil, because when you mix polymer into mineral oil, you get synthetic oil, and polymer is very low friction, and of course it reduces the wear between metal moving parts rubbing against each other. But with the high performance lubricant used in Rolex calibers, the oil is synthetic, but despite that, it still gets contaminated over 10 years with dust particles. Every time you open the crown, dust particles in the air enter the case, which is hermetically sealed. They mix in with the oil becomes dirty, and of course then the metal to metal rubs against each other with dirty oil with more friction, and that wears the movement. So when a watch is serviced, when the movement is serviced, the watchmaker disassembles the movement, and then they ultrasonically clean in an ultrasonic bath the parts of the movement, and that removes the dust particles and the contaminated dirty lubricant. They then reassemble the movement, and then they lubricate it with high performance lubricant, and of course then they regulate it in 5 positions to chronometer accuracy. So the 3135 used to have a 5-year service interval, now it has 10, due to the high performance lubricant which was developed by Rolex SA Geneva for the caliber 3235 Chronology series of movements. They now both use the same quality of oil, both have the same €700, which is the current price point of servicing. Now, some Rolex fanboys don't discuss the running cost of a Rolex, but it's something I like to talk about, and it's something that's never referred to by paid shills or Rolex fanboys that have YouTube watch channels. How much does it cost to service a Rolex? The truth is, the running cost is €700 for a full service every 10 years. And if you divide that by 10 years, that is a running cost of €70 per annum. That is negligible. €70 is the kind of expense a low-tier AliExpress collector would spend on a steel dive SD 1953 or a Pagani designed PD 1661. €70 for a Submariner data Marge. So the reality is, €70 per annum spread over 10 years is €700 every 10 years. So it's negligible running cost. And the point is, like a car with full service history, every year, if it has an oil change every 10,000 kilometres, it adds value to the car. And of course, when you come to sell it, a buyer will look for full service history from a main dealer every 10,000 kilometres. So when you get your Rolex caliber serviced, whether it's a 3135 or a 3235, having a full Rolex service history from a Rolex service centre rather than an independent watchmaker, that adds value to the piece. So for example, if you can demonstrate that your caliber 3135 was serviced every 10 years by Rolex Service Centre, it will retain its value. The other important thing is it verifies the piece is correct, because of course Rolex Service Centre have inspected the piece to make sure the movement is correct. It's not a counterfeit watch. It's not a Franken watch made from a mixture of counterfeit and correct parts. It's correct. So that's my advice to you. Do not get your Rolex piece serviced independently, even if it's a vintage piece or neo-vintage from the 1990s or early 2000s. Always use a Rolex service centre. €700 sounds like a lot of money for servicing a watch, but it comes back good as new because movement is serviced, and also they polish out any scuffs and scratches or dents in the case, and also the bracelet and clasp. And if there are any dents in the case that they can't polish out, they laser weld 904L oyster steel into the dents, and then they polish and brush satin finish it so it looks good as new. So what you get back is a brand new watch, and that's what you're paying for. It's not just the movement service, you're getting the watch restored to its correct original condition as new. So hope you've enjoyed my review of my July 2025 State of the Collection. Please feel free to post your own comments below the video. Thank you for watching.